My dear sons and daughters, you look at me now as a fragile old man sitting in a quiet room. But if you could see through my eyes, you would see a world that was once filled with the deafening roar of iron and the smell of wet earth and gunpowder. I was barely a man when they put a uniform on my back and a rifle in my hand and sent me to a place where the sun was hidden by the smoke of 1,000 fires. We lived in the trenches like animals burrowing into the mud to escape the metal rain that whistled over our heads day and night. But in that dark and terrible place, I learned something that no school or book could ever teach. I learned that the blood you spill for your country is nothing compared to the sweat you give for the man standing right next to you. We were boys from different villages, speaking different dialects and dreaming different dreams. But when the whistles blew and we climbed over the edge of that earth, we became one single heartbeat. I remember the face of a boy named Thomas, who shared his last crust of dry bread with me when I was too weak to stand, and the way we huddled together for warmth in the freezing rain, not because we were friends, but because we were brothers, born of the same shadow. You talk about loyalty today, as if it is something you can find in a contract or a handshake. But we knew loyalty as the hand that pulls you back from the brink when the world is exploding around you, and the voice that whispers your name in the dark so you don't forget who you are. I remember the silence that would fall after a battle, a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush your ribs. And in that silence, we didn't talk about glory or medals. We talked about our mothers and the smell of the harvest, and the girls we hoped to marry, if the stars were kind enough to let us see another dawn. Many of those voices were silenced forever in the mud of those fields, and I have carried their names in my heart for 80 years, like a sacred debt that can never be repaid. I want you to understand that war is not the grand adventure they show you in the moving pictures. It is a long and lonely struggle, where the only thing that keeps you human is the man to your left and the man to your right. Do not ever take your peace for granted, and do not let small differences divide you. Because when the earth is shaking and the sky is falling, the only thing that matters is the strength of the hand you are holding. I am the last one left to tell their story, and my voice is tired. But I tell you this, so you will know that the greatest strength a man can have is not the power to destroy, but the courage to protect his brother in the face of certain death. I remember the nights when the mud was so thick it felt like the earth itself was trying to pull us down into its cold embrace, and the only way to stay sane was to find the rhythm of a shared breath in the dark. We didn't have the luxury of dry beds or warm fires, and the dampness would seep into your bones until you forgot what it felt like to be warm. But even in that misery, there was a strange and powerful light that came from the man sitting across from you, whose eyes reflected the same fear and the same stubborn will to live today. You live in a world where you can walk away from a friend over a small disagreement, but in the trenches, you didn't have that choice, because your life was literally in their hands, and their life was in yours. I remember a night when the shelling was so loud that the ground felt like it was liquid, and a boy named Arthur, who was barely 18, grabbed my hand and held it so tight that his knuckles were white as bone. We didn't speak a word because the noise of the iron was too great, but in that grip, we said everything that needed to be said about being terrified and being human and being together. We learned to find a kind of beauty in the smallest things, like a single dry cigarette shared between 5 men, or the sight of a bird that had landed on a piece of tangled wire, as if to remind us that a world of peace still existed somewhere beyond the smoke. You think that strength is about how much you can carry, or how loud you can shout, but I tell you that real strength is the quiet grace of a man who stays awake on his watch, so his exhausted brother can sleep for just 1 hour of peace. I saw men from the city, and men from the farms, who would have never crossed paths in a normal life now treating each other like bloodkin, because when the bullets are flying, they don't care about your wealth or your status. They only care about the target. I carry the weight of those years in my shoulders, and in the way I still wake up when the thunder rolls across the summer sky, thinking for a split second that the iron rain has returned. But then I remember that I am the one who survived to tell you that the bond of the Brotherhood is the only thing that can withstand the fires of hell. Do not let your comforts make you soft, and do not let your safety make you selfish. Because the greatest treasure you will ever have is the person who stands by you. when the world is at its worst. I want you to look at your friends and see them not as people who can do something for you, but as souls who are on this journey with you through the mud and the light and the shadow of the years. I remember the letters we wrote by the light of a single guttering candle stub, tucked into a niche in the dirt wall, and how we had to keep our voices low, so the silence wouldn't hear our secrets. We wrote to the wives we hadn't seen in years, and the fathers who had taught us how to plow a straight furrow, and every word was a prayer that the paper would reach a home we feared we might never see again today. You send 100 messages in an hour. But do you ever say the things that truly matter in the trenches? We didn't waste our breath on small talk because every breath felt like it could be our last. I saw men who had been hard and cold in their former lives weep like children over a photograph of a dog or a garden gate, because in that place of iron and blood, the simplest memories became the only things that were real. I remember a man named Silas who had a voice like a mountain stream, and he would sing low under his breath when the night was at its darkest, just to give us a rhythm to hold on to, so we wouldn't drift away into the madness of the shelling. We weren't heroes in the way the history books describe us. We were just tired, hungry boys who loved each other more than we feared the end, and that love was a shield that no bullet could ever truly pierce you. Live in a world where you are told to look out for yourself and to get ahead at any cost. But I tell you that the only way to get ahead is to reach back and pull the man behind you up into the light. We shared our water when our throats were like sandpaper, and we shared our boots when the leather rotted away, because we knew that if one of us fell, the whole line would break. I carry the silence of those who didn't come home in the way I sit in my garden today, and I listen to the wind, because I can still hear their laughter in the rustle of the leaves, as if they are still standing watch over the world they saved. Do not let your hearts become as cold as the metal machines you rely on, and do not forget that the greatest wall you will ever have to climb is the one you build between yourself and your neighbor. For we are all in the same trench of life, and the only thing that makes the journey worth the struggle is the unspoken bond that says, I am here for you, and you are here for me, until the very last whistle blows. I remember when the war finally ended, and the silence that followed was so loud it hurt my ears, because we had forgotten what a world without the screaming of shells sounded like. We stood there in the wreckage of the earth, looking at one another with eyes that didn't know how to see peace, and the hardest part was letting go of the hands we had held so tightly in the dark. I saw men who had faced death without blinking, now weeping because they had to say goodbye to the brothers who had become their entire world today. You move from one person to another, like you are changing clothes, but we were woven together by the sweat and the blood of those years, and you cannot untangle a bond like that without tearing the soul. I went back to my village, and I tried to walk the plow again, but the soil felt different, because I knew how many of my friends were sleeping beneath earth, just like it across the sea. I spent my middle years building houses and raising a family, but every time I hammered a nail, I thought of the men who never got to build a home of their own, and that thought made me work harder and love deeper than any man who hasn't seen the end of the world, ever. Could you think that the things you buy are what make you a man? But I tell you that a man is made by the promises he keeps to the dead and the kindness he shows to the living who are struggling in their own private trenches. I carry the medals in a small wooden box under my bed, not because I am proud of the killing, but because those bits of metal are the only physical proof that those brave boys ever existed, and that I was there to witness their light before it went out. Do not let your lives be filled with hollow noise, and do not let your hearts become as hard as the stones in a graveyard, because the only thing that survives a century is the love you were brave enough to give when everything else was being taken away. I am an old man now, and my breath is short, but my spirit is still standing in that trench, holding the line for the brothers who can no longer speak for themselves. I want you to look at the person next to you and realize that they are your brother too, and that the only war worth winning is the one where you save each other from the cold and the dark, for the bond of the Brotherhood is the only bridge that can carry you from this world into the next, with your head held high. My children, as I stand here at the very edge of my century looking out at a world that has forgotten the sound of the whistles and the smell of the damp earth, I realize that the trenches never truly left me. They just moved inside my heart, where they became the foundation of everything I ever built, Every house I framed and every child I held was a tribute to the men who stayed behind in the mud, and whose voices I still hear in the quiet moments before the dawn. We spend our lives running away from the shadows, but I tell you that it is in the deep shadows that you find the true light of a human soul and the true meaning of a brother's love. I remember the day I finally put down my rifle and realized that the war was over, but the Brotherhood would last as long as there was breath in my lungs, and even now I feel their hands on my shoulders, as if they are guiding me toward the final trench, where we will all meet again today. You worry about your status and your digital dreams, but when you are 101 years old, like me, you will see that the only thing that remains is the memory of the person who stayed with you when everyone else ran away. I am laying down my heavy pack now, and I am ready to go to my rest, because I have kept the promise I made to those boys 80 years ago, that I would never let their names or their sacrifice be forgotten. Do not be afraid of the struggles that come your way. For a life without a struggle is a life without a story, and a heart without a scar is a heart that is never truly loved. Look at the man next to you, and see him as a comrade in this long march of life, and never let the coldness of the world extinguish the fire of your loyalty, for the blood and the sweat pass away into the earth. But the brotherhood is eternal, and it is the only thing you will carry with you when you cross the final line into the light. I leave you my peace, and I leave you my strength, and I ask only that you live a life worthy of the many who never got to grow old like me. Goodbye to the fields, and goodbye to the noise, and welcome to the silence where all the brothers are waiting.